I hope I'm saying his last name right. Thomas Kimono was a man who was factually put away into prison for abuse, molesting, lewd conduct toward young girls by pretending. How he did this was he pretended that his cat was lost. Okay. I'm going to read you an email that I received from one of his victims who is now an adult, but she was just an eight-year-old child back in 1995. Here's what it reads in part. I was 8 years old, living in Dana Point, California, when Thomas approached my friend and I to help him find his cat. He took us to a park behind my house and tried to molest me before I ran away. I was a key witness in his trial before he was sentenced to 8 years in prison. He molested multiple girls between 1990 and 1995. Now, you will notice that I am not saying allegedly because he went to prison for this. So this is not I'm not risking defamation here. She's not lying. We looked into this. In 1990, Camino was placed on probation for pleading no contest to lewd conduct involving children in Manhattan Beach. That's in Orange County. A few years later, he apparently went on a tear to try to lure young girls in an entirely different county. Okay, let's read an article regarding that sentencing. Here's the headline in the LA Times. This is from 1995. As you can see, the headline reads, Child Molester Draws an 8-year term in prison. Thomas Michael Camino, who tried to lure girls with a lost cat story, gets maximum sentence requested by the parents of 3 victims. Listen to that. 3 victims, okay? The article goes on. It says, Thomas Michael Camino, 31 years old, of San Juan Capistrano, was convicted in May of molesting an 8-year-old girl and trying to lure a dozen others into sexual encounters by asking for help in finding his cat. Orange County Superior Court Commissioner Richard M. Aronson imposed the maximum term after the parents of 3 victims rose in sadness and anger to seek a stern punishment. The father of a 7-year-old girl who alluded that Camino said the cat ruse preyed on the girl's innocence. Camino's lawyer said his client, who had previously maintained his innocence, was now admitting his guilt. Attorney Danny Davis sought a shorter 6-year sentence, arguing that the maximum term might harm any chance for needing psychological counseling and rehabilitation. Camino terrorized the Dana Point neighborhood for more than 4 months last year. Prosecutors said he approached young girls, lured them into secluded spots such as a riverbed and the basement of a house by asking them to find his cat. The basement of a house. He was convicted of molestation, indecent exposure, and 10 counts of child annoyance. In the molestation case, Camino grabbed the girl's hand and forced her to touch him. Now, I want you to remember that this happened across 2 counties, okay? I also want you to remember that we're speaking about 7-year-olds and 8-year-olds, right? We're talking about 3rd graders, not toddlers whose memories might be iffy, who might have difficulty communicating things, might not find the right words, might not be sure of themselves, but 8-year-olds who are fully online mentally, right? Imagine yourself at 8 years old in 3rd grade. I have every memory of being in 3rd grade. I have memory of traumas in 3rd grade when a cousin of mine died in a car accident. Despite his conviction, despite having spent years in prison for these crimes, Rob McCoy, the pastor who makes my skin crawl, struck up thereafter and maintained a long friendship with Thomas Camino across decades. Now, that's not exactly a problem per se. Rehabilitation is a thing. The problem comes in when Rob then decides that Camino should be involved in the Calvary Chapel Church, and more specifically, that Camino should have access to young children in a program called Home Fellowship, which put him inside the homes of children. And he almost got away with it until some mothers went online, remembered exactly what had happened, and raised hell about it in 2022. Now, in response to this being discovered, Rob McCoy did not apologize. No. That's not how this works. Instead, you are about to see Rob basically employ tactics of psychological gaslighting. Maybe he learned this from his father, who did this for Navy intelligence, right? But he is going to host Thomas Camino for a podcast episode on the Bryce Eddy Show. He's going to vent his frustration at the people who are up in arms about the placement of this man in close confine with young children without people recognizing that, okay, this guy has literally spent 8 years in prison for abuse,